Welcome back, David. I see you're still enjoying the sun. I'm not so fortunate today, uh, which is something that brings me to talking about, like, again, circadian rhythms, uh, more about why blue light and night life might be the ones that's aging us faster. I know we had a couple of years ago now conversation in Orlando how nightlife can affect your sexual preferences as well. When combined with a
Yes.
lot of other things, what people usually do, alcohol, recreational drugs. A lot of people now, they even mix in performance enhancing drugs. It's a nightmare. But anyways, that's not the topic of today. We might touch on it later on. Maybe if somebody wants to leave comments, if they want to dwell into that. But more about science of circadian timing, blue lights, night shifts, all those kind of things. And why it specifically interests me is because more often than not, I'm working through the nights. But I try to get back into daytime schedule as quick as I can. But I know a lot of people, they adjust to this, let's say virtual assistants, some business owners who have partners in across Atlantic and so on and so forth. So what's happening there and what do we need to be mindful of?
Yeah. So first let's distinguish something that a lot of people might think it's minutia, but it's actually very important. When you wake up and when you go to sleep is not a circadian rhythm, right? A circadian rhythm is an actual clock, a timekeeping mechanism at the genetic level. So, in other words, there's called these things called clock genes. One of them is literally called clock, and there's another one called BMAL. And there's a couple of others that play a role in the mechanisms of the circadian rhythm. But what I wanted to make very clear is that when you wake up and when you go to sleep can vary, right? It can be, obviously, if you work night shift, you're completely backwards from everybody else. Or like you said, you can shift. Hey, I'm waking up, at 10 or 11 a.m. and I'm staying till 1 a.m. or whatever. That is not a circadian rhythm. That is a sleep wake cycle. They are different, right? A circadian rhythm is something that is optimized by the physics of your environment, right? So this is what I mean by that. Okay, I'll make a pretty clear example. You're going to normally get a signal for sex hormone manufacturing sometime in the mid morning, right? And then you're going to manufacture sex hormones. That, like, if you were to open up a textbook, that's what it says, right? And there's also, in the evening, hey, melatonin rises, and then there's T4 that gets produced, and then there's a growth hormone. So, like, they have this kind of timed out, but that's all in the concept of that is when normal biology would execute those tasks because it's optimized for certain tasks. So, for example, why would biology be optimized to make sex hormones um, signaling in the mid morning and then culminating like a midday? Why would that happen? Because sex hormones require UV light to be able to optimally make uh, cholesterol into prohormones and those prohormones then into sex hormones. Okay. That's why it's the time of day where that process in your body is optimized, right? So that is a circadian signaling mechanism, meaning your body is paying attention to environmental signals to optimize its biology to execute specific tasks day after day after day, right? When you wake and when you sleep, if it doesn't line up with those things, then eventually you run those. Let's just continue to talk about sex hormones. You'll run your sex hormone deficit deeper and deeper year after year after year. It doesn't mean that 1 week or even a month or two of executing that slightly off sleep wake cycle where you're missing certain parts of the optimized circadian rhythm within the biology. It doesn't mean that you're going to crush yourself, in that 1 week or 1 month or 2 months. It's a long-term thing, right? Because your body has adaptations to survive poor environments, right? Like, for example, a lot of people don't think about this. Winter is a poor environment for mammals, period. Yes, I know that a lot of people live somewhere where winter happens for, 4 or 6 months out of the year or longer, right? But that does not mean it's not stressful. That is a stressful environment for mammalian biology, right? So we've adapted to be able to do this type of thing, which also gives most people the green light of, oh, well, it's not hurting me right now, so it's not a big deal, right? We'll deal with it later, right? And that's what the concept that I wanted to bring is this is an erosion that happens year after year. 5 years later, it's way worse than it was at the beginning. 10 years later, it's like a whole decade of this, and now you're in the gutter, right? The way that you don't mess it up is you understand that that's what's happening and you get yourself back on track, just like training, right? Like you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be consistent enough that, hey, my body is receiving this type of stimulus in the background and it interprets it as correct, or correct for whatever you're wanting to accomplish. And as long as you're consistent, meaning it's not months later that you engage in the activity, but fairly regularly, twice a week, 3 times a week. That's enough training to continue those stimulus effects. A circadian mechanism is, especially, and again, I'm talking in the context of your job or your lifestyle gets in the way of it, right? So do you just permanently let it go, or do you know what the differences are, and you, whenever you can, right, a weekend off or a vacation for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, you adhere to proper circadian mechanisms, because you're not going to be preoccupied doing all these other things, so that your biology can get back on track and manufacture things correctly. That is really the biggest thing that I want to bring. If you don't get anything else from this conversation, that is what I want you to understand: is you are a diurnal creature, waking up with the sun and going to sleep with the sun, and avoiding messing that up. And that's probably going to be the bulk of what we're going to talk about because of the season that's coming. Avoiding messing that up once the sun goes down. If you just do those 3 things for 3, 4 days out of the week, even if you don't do it every day, that is still beneficial for your biology, so that you're not consistently running yourself into the ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of brings back to that almost the fact that shift workers and even frequent flyers are at higher risk of developing heart diseases and all those kind of things, which links to everything else. Uh, so blue lights and night shifts, what's the correlation to health and what's happening there?
Yeah, yeah. So okay. So the concept that I just is very, very basic, right? You wake up with the sun, you go to sleep with the sun. Most people actually don't really have a problem with the waking up with the sun, especially if you're somebody who already has a job, right? You're already going to be waking up. What's waking up 30 minutes earlier? Or maybe you already wake up at the right time anyway, right? So it's more of like, just change up some things, right? Like, instead of, just jumping in your car and going to work, maybe you take a little walk around your yard, or maybe you sit in your car with the windows down as you drive, or when you arrive at so it's very easy to kind of get the right signaling in the morning for most people, right? Unless you have one of these jobs that we just talked about. And that's why I opened with what I said. But the biggest thing that catches everybody, especially at this transition period that's about to happen here next month, which is the fall equinox. From that point forward, the nights are going to get longer and the days are going to get shorter. They're already starting, right? And the temperature is going to change, right? And again, I'm speaking specifically to people in the northern hemisphere, basically all of Europe, and North America, et cetera. Um, and this time of the year, it's easy to be like in summertime mode, right? And then kids are starting to go back to school or whatnot, and you get caught up in all of their activities that usually happen after school. And it's very easy to start going, oh, the sun was going down at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock p.m. or 7 o'clock p.m. And now it's going down at 6 or 5, right? And you're kind of still in the mode of like busy, 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 and you're going along with all the things that you got to do, socially and for your kids and whatnot. and you end up actually entraining a secondary mechanism that basically stops you from telling that it's nighttime, right? And what that means is when there's blue light that enters the eye, that's the same type of light that your brain is paying attention to, that it's noon, right? Because that's a waypoint in the middle of the day when there's an abundance of blue light, because that's when there's going to be the most UV, and UV's just a little bit past blue. So there's going to be an abundance of that blue spectrum in the natural day around noon. But 100% blue light, because all LEDs are heavy, heavy in the blue.
You broke
Almost
up a
none.
little bit. You said but, and then you froze a little bit. What did you say?
Oh, okay. So, but most people get, the sun goes down, and most people get only blue light, right?
Hmm.
So they've done a good job of getting morning light. They've done a good job of going outside, but since the days are so much shorter, boom, they turn on their artificial lights, and now they disrupted and sent the signal. 1 hour of this isn't going to make a big deal, but the problem isn't the 1 hour. The problem is the sun went down at 6. You're not going to go to bed until 10. That's 4 hours of blue light stimulation. You've essentially done a good enough job that the brain gets confused. Was that noon? Right? We spent 4 hours of getting a lot of blue light entering the eye. That's going to suppress melatonin big time. You're going to have a harder time going to bed. At first, it might not be like a big deal, but week after week, that will become a big deal. You start to get really tired. You start to develop more anxiety and all of those things. And then that culminates in actually heart attack season. We know in the Northern Hemisphere, December is heart attack season. Why? Because your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system are out of sync in a big way. They're still operating in summertime mode. The problem is you're not getting summertime sunlight, which is what runs biology without unnecessary amount of calories coming in through food. So what you end up doing is eating a lot of food, and you're depressed or anxiety, and you have a parasympathetic sympathetic mismatch, and now you have heart arrhythmias and AFib and all kinds of things going on with the heart, because it can't actually tell what it's supposed to be doing. When you look at it through that framework, what's the solution? You make sure you don't stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system as aggressively as most people will, with a lot of blue light going into the eye. You want to basically replicate what other mammals are doing at that time of the year, which is they're more on the rest and recovery side of things and less on the activity side of things. But when it is daytime, they're very active, right? Squirrels, for example, they don't necessarily hibernate, but they're very active during the day, but they get a lot more rest, right? So you want to replicate some of that. Even if it's, once or twice a week, if you have like weird schedules and stuff like that. But if you, operate a 9 to 5 or something like that, then basically the solution is you start doing your very best that once the sun goes down, you avoid as much blue light as possible. That goes, the easiest is some blue light blocking glasses. I go as far as not as turning off overhead lighting and using some lamps with some red light bulbs in them, or infrared devices. If you have them, I just turn them on as background lighting. And to tell you the truth, you can operate for the same amount of time, 3 4 hours into the evening, with that lower level, different color of lighting, just like if it was regular blue lighting. But what you notice is the moment it's time to go to bed, you get just as restful or even more restful sleep, which improves, the dreary weather that's outside every single morning that you're going to wake up to. It sets you up for proper cellular function, even though you still have to be active during, the nighttime. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically, if somebody is still into the work mode where they need to use a little laptop at home and whatnot, ideally they have a backup light with just like incandescent bulbs and use blue
That
light
that that would
blocking
work.
glasses. If they, because a lot of people will still snack and have a dinner or all those kind of things, just change the light and that
Yes.
can prolong, because these type of lights we have now, they've only been around for like 10 years, 50, in the US, obviously much longer, but in my country, maybe last 5, 7 years. Not, not,
Yeah.
not any longer than that. At night, you had your open fire, and that was it. pretty
Yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah. Or you had fire, you had candles, you had incandescent light bulbs. All of those put off a whole bunch of infrared. They put off minimal blue, right?
Mm.
And they put off a lot of orange, a lot of warmer colors, right? And that makes a difference. It makes a difference on how your body interprets what it should be doing and what time of the day it is. And then going further than that, right? Like if you are somebody who actually has to work on the computer, there's the blue light blocking glasses. There are even now screens that are being developed. Like one, I have a tablet that's called the Daylight tablet, where there is no blue light in it. It's actually an infrared backlight on it.
Mm.
It's more like paper, it doesn't have a color screen or anything like that. But if you got to get some work done at night and you don't want to disturb that, that's a very viable thing. That's called daylight computer. There are other screens well, not screens. There are software for Apple and there's software for Windows. That's blue light blocking. I think Iris software on Apple and Flux for Windows. That's software that you can add on to any laptop, any desktop, and there's settings there that it'll actively filter out blue light. You can even set it to be on a timer, right? So that when the sun goes down, it automatically does that. You don't have to remember to do it. So there are ways around that type of thing that are very beneficial for preserving the ability to go through proper signaling at the cellular level, right? And then the next thing is you must engage in cold, right? Like there isn't a way around that. You have to tell your body what's going on outside. Unfortunately, we live basically in a world where you can live at 68 degrees permanently year round without any like theoretical
No
any
matter where you
consequence.
are.
Yeah, no, exactly. No matter where you are, it's 68 degrees. The humidity is always going to be the same. The temperature is always going to be the same. And the lighting is always going to be blue lit. You can live in that world, right? The problem is biology is optimized to use different lighting and different non-lighting, right? Whenever it's not light, to execute some of its biological functions. And that's really the problem that people are missing is that the inputs from the outside govern inputs inside of you. Right? And that's if it's not clear by now, it should be. And knowing that the solution is almost always very, very simple. It can get complicated depending on, if you live in an inner city and lots of tech around, that's when it starts to get complicated. But for the most part, right, if you kind of get rid of that, smooth that out, it doesn't mean you don't have TVs or anything, but you don't live somewhere where it's a high tech, bustling city, right? If you live in the suburbs, if you live a little bit out more rural, basically it looks like this. The solution is always just spend some time outside, irrelevant of what the weather is doing outside. If it's cold, you're supposed to get a little bit cold. If it's sunny, you're supposed to get the sun, right? That's as non-scientific and as basic as it really needs to be. Now, the ins and the outs of how complicated it can be, that's like, oh, I have a specific problem, right? Maybe for example, maybe it's a sympathetic versus parasympathetic problem. That's another thing, right? Like if hey, I've been doing this wrong for a long time and I'm definitely over sympathetic. It's hard, like sometimes I can't sleep or I have, a lot of anxiety when I do sleep, I wake up with anxiety. Then that starts to tell me, hey, your sympathetic system is way too overactive. Something's not allowing it to switch over. Cold is a great way to turn off the sympathetic system because what it's going to do is it's going to cool the blood going to your brain. When you start to cool the blood going to the brain tends to go into parasympathetic mode, especially if it's the carotid arteries or anything like that. But a cold plunge is going to get all of them. But what I'm saying is the weather that's outside, you're supposed to experience it in the morning, at least for 15 to 20 minutes. If it's cold, great. If it's not, don't worry about it. If it's cloudy, don't worry about it. A lot of people get too upset that if it's not the perfect weather outside, I'm not going to go outside. Right. And couldn't be further from the truth. The weather, both temperature and heat, influence biological processes and start to stabilize that sympathetic response versus parasympathetic response.
And what you're saying there, just for clarity, you're not saying, hey, you need to buy a cold plunge. You're saying expose yourself to temperatures that's out in the nature.
Yeah. But yeah, most people honestly, unless you're trying to like biohack, you want cold where the cold doesn't exist, aka it's summertime, it's 90 degrees outside, and you want a cold plunge because you want to augment, some kind of brain function, or you have a specific problem. Then in those cases, I would say yes, great, do that. If you are for the most part healthy, right? There's nothing necessarily wrong with you. You don't really have any real biological problems that you need medications for, or certain things that are your limitations. If you don't have any of those problems, you don't really need to spend a lot of money on, cold plunges or infrared light therapy lamps or specialized UV bulbs unless you live a weird lifestyle like a night shift.
Hmm.
Right. If you don't live a night shift style and you don't have any of these health problems, basically what it comes down to is just go outside, irrelevant of the temperature, because the temperature is going to take care of, hey, if you're supposed to be getting cold exposure, you're going to get the cold exposure because the weather is going to dictate that. But if you do have certain problems, cold exposure combined with strong sunlight, that is a really good, what I would call intracellular melanin production phase, right? So if, for example, let's say you're remediating from electromagnetic field poisoning, that would be a viable strategy. Hey, I want you to get a cold plunge combined with really strong sunlight. That means that in the summertime when there's really strong sunlight, you're either going to spend a ton of money on ice or you're going to spend some money on a good cold plunge so that you can get cold when it's not supposed to be cold. Because there's certain things that happen with melanin production and dopamine production when you combine cold with sunlight, especially at the internal level. So remelionating the internals, like it could be, maybe you had surgery, like some kind of stomach surgery, or where they opened up your stomach cavity. There's this thing called adhesions. Anytime blue light hits inter-organ spaces, there can be adhesions. If you want to limit adhesions, cold exposure combined with sunlight, that's a really great combination to prevent adhesions for something like some kind of a stomach surgery, whether that was liposuction or a gallbladder removal or appendix removal, something like that, like those types of surgeries, or even a hernia type of surgery. Those types of surgery, anything on the lower stomach, cold combined with sunlight, very, very valuable. Um, Cold by itself would be very valuable because what that does is it starts to make internal UV light. And in order to do that, you got to get cold. So that type of thing is more unique. Hey, you're in this situation, this is going to be viable. If you don't have that situation going on, you don't need to spend that kind of money.
You kind of touched up of what chronic misalignment can do, hormone disruption, cognitive disruption, many, many more things like that. Uh, how long is chronic that someone already starts noticing that there is something off? Because for me, every 3 to 4 weeks, I will have 5 to 7 days when I work just nights. And then I go back to my normal as quick as I can. Will those few days be enough to disrupt my circadian rhythm?
No, no, no. It would have to be about the opposite of what you just said, right? So if let's just say let's take 1 month, right? 1 month you spend 6 days working nights. It's not really going to be that big of a deal. If the moment those are over, you're back to normal operations. It's not really going to be a big deal. If it was the other way around, hey, 3 weeks, I really mess up my sleep wake cycle and I work nights and I have 1 week to recover from. That is a lot more difficult. That would be what I would classify as chronic exposure. More than about 75% of the time, if it's disrupted, that's what I would call chronic, right? If you want to measure it by months, if you want to measure it by weeks, it doesn't really matter how you measure it. But if 75% of the time you're actually messing up that circadian wheel, then that's what I would consider chronic. The amount of time that it would take before you notice would probably be one season, meaning a 6 month block,
Hmm.
right? If you go for 6 months of doing that type of thing, at the end of that 6 months, you're going to notice something, right? Is it going to be detrimental? Maybe, maybe not. That depends on your age. That depends on what it is.
So if I was to say, hey, you know what, I know every 3 to 4 weeks I need to do this overnight stuff, I'll just gonna stay to this sleep-wake cycle where I only wake up really late in the afternoon, stay up really late at night. For 6 months or so, I'm gonna feel nothing, and then I might start having like chronic issues with
Yeah,
fatigue,
yeah,
brain
yeah.
fog, so on and
Hmm.
so, which I
And that's
definitely
where it would probably
experienced
start.
few
Yeah,
years ago when I was traveling to different country every 2 weeks,
yeah,
and I was like, "This is not good." And my blood test even showed that. I was like,
yeah.
"Okay,
Yeah,
let's pull back
yeah,
and get back to
and
normal."
that's what I say. Everyone will notice something by 6 months, right?
Mm.
It could happen at the 4 or 3 month mark, but by 6 months, if you're continuing that life, you will know, right? You're not going to feel really good. Does it mean you can't operate? No, no, that's the thing, right? Like you could be like, you know what? I'm getting a lot of brain fog. I'm getting a lot of this, a little bit of fatigue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to supplement with some modafinil and I'm going to bump up my caffeine. You can mask it, right? The symptoms that will come up will be things that you can take a drug for, right?
Everyone does.
Right. And then you can continue that, right? And then you can keep going for another 6 months. And then, 1 year later, you're like, now I'm in a really big hole. What do I do about this? Depending on exactly what's going on, there could be more drugs you could take, right? And then you can
Mm.
continue that cycle again and keep going, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like this is a but by the time you're investigating the rabbit hole like we're talking about, you've probably already been doing this for a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years, right? Of this messed up signaling problem, right? And we got to try to undo 3 or 4, 2 to 3 years of that type of thing. Usually that's what I find is the minimum. It's been 2 or 3 years of that type of disruption.
Yeah, and it's more common and common recently as well because, like I said, all this light and all this technology advancements and like 5G has been what, year, 2 years old, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's only changing much faster. So we don't even know what's gonna happen, uh, but we know what's already happening.
Yeah.
So minimizing the negative effects of this would kind of be a smart idea now that what you already said about like style life stages of life. When you're a little baby, you sleep every 15 minutes, you go for a nap or so. And it doesn't matter. You sleep in the middle of the night, you wake up, eat, and go to sleep again. When you're a teenager, you can still sustain something like that. When you get to 25, 35, 45, 50, you better start taking a bit more notion about what's where how because now
Yeah.
your body knows when is it
Yeah.
sunrise, sunset, and so on, right?
Well, and what I want to bring up the detail there, the reason, right? The reason why it goes like that. Hey, when you're young, you can get away. Obviously you require more deep sleep, and so you'll tend to have longer stints of sleep, right? Whether that's broken up or not. And then as you mature, you end up going the opposite direction, where it seems like you don't need nearly as much sleep at all to function, and then what starts to happen is that kind of peaks in your late 20s, maybe early 30s. The reason for that is that's when the engine, the mitochondrial engine, starts to downregulate its ability to make mitochondrial water. What does that
Mm.
mean, right? In simple terms, when you're young, you're like 90% water when you're a baby. When you're, 10, 12, 13 years old, you're like 85% water. When you're in your teens and 20s, you're like 75% water. You are drying out as you age. Why is that important? Water is a light chromophore. It absorbs light just like any other crystalline form, and it absorbs certain wavelengths way more than other wavelengths. Those certain wavelengths are in the warm spectrum, meaning infrared light, near infrared light, red, orange. All of those get absorbed in a major way. It's like a big battery, right? And what do we know about infrared light? It causes ATP production to be more stable, meaning higher output for longer, etc. Just like a battery would. So it's basically telling you that as you age, right, once you get past those late 20s, early 30s, you have less water in your body. And that means that each minute that you spend outside getting signaling from the sun requires a little bit more time as you get older, a little bit more time as you get older, and so on, to get the same level of energy output out of the system because your battery is getting smaller over time.
Yeah, it's something that people don't catch up with, and then you pair it with processed foods, electromagnetic fields, lots of alcohol, lots of traveling, lots of
Yeah, so you you
everything
you end up
else.
doing more damage to that water battery, right? Alcohol will dehydrate the water battery. The dieting incorrectly will dehydrate the water battery. And then there is things like the electromagnetic fields, right? Like those we know dehydrate cells, right? Like that is the thing that they do. They actually vibrate the water molecule inside systems to make them hot. So it's one of those things where there's a lot of behaviors that will make you dehydrated, and anything that makes you dehydrated as you get older makes the circadian mechanism a little bit less um, acute, right? Less able to decipher the signal. Let's put it that way, right? That's the sensitivity button, right? The amount of water in your body tells you how sensitive you are and how quickly you can get back on track. So, for example, if you're 20 years old and you work night shift, you're probably not going to experience much negatives if on your days off you spend it like a normal person. You go outside, you hang out with your friends, you go for boat rides, etc. You do all the things that you would do that's exciting to a 20-year-old, right? Which is usually outdoor activities and hanging out with friends and whatnot. And then you go back to shift work, and you're working nights, you're actually probably going to undo most of that damage on that week off that you had because you're so full of water. You're able to absorb a lot of sunlight frequencies and get your circadian mechanisms and your biology right back on track very quickly, right? Fast forward a decade later, now you're 35, 45, etc. You can't get away with the same schedule. It has to be augmented in a different direction. If you work night shifts still, you have to almost double the time that you don't work night shift to get the same results that you were getting when you were 20 because of this system of dehydration as you age. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, and it's almost like a kind of hidden message that you didn't say directly is it's not about calories, it's about food quality,
Yeah. Food quality,
which
or
a lot of people
let me phrase
still
it more
fall for it.
precisely. Let's phrase it more precisely. It's about energy quality, right?
Mm.
Because food is energy, right? But sunlight is energy as well. It's the quality of all of the energy that you get that matters, right? For example, an infrared light therapy lamp, that's energy. That's going to give the body energy, but it's very targeted and it's not full spectrum. So it's the quality, think of it like a supplement, like a protein powder. It's just the protein, right? It's none of the minerals, it's none of the cofactors that go along with assimilating a full protein source from a beef cow or a fish, right? So that's the way that I want to have people think about all, because there's going to be a lot of light therapies that come out, right? Infrared light is only the start. There's going to be opsin therapy. There's going to be all kinds of different types of therapies that involve light that are going to be coming out in the future.
And there will be
And
also a lot of lab-grown foods coming out.
correct, right? And you have to think about this. The quality of the energy that created the thing that's you're putting in your body or touching your body matters. The highest quality is always going to be the sun in terms of light quality and energy quality. So anything outside. And the food quality thing is basically anything that's grown outside in nature because of the same system is interacting there, right? Um, so that gets us that could potentially get us off in other topics like does the energy outside fluctuate depending on where you live, and the answer is absolutely. Inside a city versus outside a city, we've had little conversations about that where the electromagnetic field of the city actually disrupts the amount of sunlight that gets through that, right? And that's just the electromagnetic field effect. If you live somewhere like, for example, someone nearby to me is Salt Lake City. It's in a valley. It's in a big valley. In the winter, all of it is smog because the cold air keeps all the pollution down in the valley and it doesn't
Mm.
let it leave. Those are chemicals. Those reflect sunlight, right? You are not going to get the same level of sunlight inside that valley in the winter versus just outside the valley. It will be a completely different spectrum, right? So those are the types of things that people need to think about when it terms to energy quality matters. It's not just the food, it's everything that you interact with that's going to matter in the long term of how your body falls apart or stays good.
Yeah, and it's bringing it back to our original topics that you can create circadian bankruptcy without even knowing that, just by following up the lifestyle that keeps you busy, but actually depletes your ability to create energy, depletes your ability to be mentally sharp, like psychologically as well, not just
Mhm.
solving some equations and whatnot, but just feeling good. And
Yeah, yeah. Just the general feeling of, hey, I just feel really good, right? I just feel good. If we got to do some really hard physical work, I'm down for that. If we got to do some really hard mental work, I'm down for that. Like just the ability to be well-rounded and just, kind of like when you were younger, where it didn't really matter what the job that you got. You were just like, well, I'll just figure it out on the way. I'll figure it out, right? It didn't hold you back from executing on a job
mm,
of you've never done it before, or that it was going to be hard. It didn't really matter to you because you were in a state of well-being, right? A lot of people don't operate from that state once they get into their late 30s and 40s. They operate from the state of, I have to do this, so I'm going to do whatever I can to get it done,
and
right?
and now it happens even earlier than late 30s, 40s. It's like teenage years. Kids have never been outside. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
because the way we class being outside is very different to what people think outside. They're like, no,
Yeah,
go into your car and drive into your office or school and then spending all day in bed. It's not being outside.
correct. Right.
It just
Right.
isn't.
So mainly the biggest takeaway from this particular thing is, hey, the weather is changing. The biggest threat to your circadian mechanism that's probably feeling pretty good at the end of summer because the days are so long that it's okay to be busy all day long. The sun's up all day long, right? And by the time 9 o'clock comes around, you're tired anyway, so you go to bed, right? So summertime is actually where most people do the best circadian maintenance, unless you have like a nighttime job, because it kind of sets you up for you're going to get daylight pretty much the whole time you're awake, right?
Mm.
And so even if you spend a small amount of time here and there outside, you still get plenty of it and you're feeling pretty well and you're not going to sleep. Even if you do go to sleep at 11 p.m., it's only been dark for an hour and a half, right? So it's not like you're disrupting a lot of things in there. But now it's going to start to go the other direction, right? The days are going to probably, here in a month, they'll be equal 12 hours of night, 12 hours of daytime. And then it'll shift. It'll be 13 hours of night, 11 hours of daytime. This is where you still got to start to pay attention to. Let's not disrupt, especially the evening time, that melatonin release, that circadian release to get you to properly sleep and properly attenuate hunger management, right? That is actually a very, very good hunger management tool because what most people will find is as soon as there's about 3 hours of nighttime where you're going to spend indoors with artificial lights on, that's about when you're going to start snacking at night. Most people
Mm.
will experience that. Somewhere around 2 to 3 hours of artificial light stimulation at night is when you're going to get the snack attacks. You're going to walk into your pantry and you're going to kill everything that's in the pantry because, it's 9 o'clock at night and you've been in front of screens and artificial light for 2 or 3 hours. The reason why is because your body is interpreting it's noon. We still have another half a day to come and we're feeling you don't have enough energy to execute. We're preparing you for that. That's the signal that you sent through light. Whereas if you flip it around and use only red light, the signal that starts to get amplified is melatonin release. So it's actually going to have you lull down. You're going to be less active. You're not even going to really want to move around. You're going to be more chill, and the hunger is going to be suppressed. And then next thing you know, 9 o'clock is going to come around, and you're going to want to go to bed. That is actually a signal you want to send.
Yeah, we know it's happening. We just want to make people aware that they can be proactive and look after themselves and share this with anyone else.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
it's
now's the
getting
time to execute. Like
yeah.
that the reason why we're doing it here in August and not in September when it's already equal day and equal night is because this is going to take practice, right?
Mm.
You're not going to automatically walk into your kitchen, when the sun has gone down and turn off all the overhead lighting, right? That's not the normal response for most people. They're going to turn it on, right, instead of turning it off,
Yeah.
right? So this is the perfect time to the sun's not quite, it's not quite super dark yet at 5 o'clock, but it's hey, let's start eating dinner a little bit earlier, so that we can have time to wrap it up and start turning off overhead light. This is the perfect month to start practicing some of this. And then as you notice that it gets darker in September and darker in October, you've already started to implement some of these strategies.
Yeah. Awesome, David. Appreciate your time as usual, and we'll dig deeper on some heavy topics next week.
Awesome. Thank you.